Welcome to lecture number 16 on the Sefer Kuzari. And we are in the second essay, or the Ma'amar Hasheni, and we are about to study Ot Yud Ches, which would be paragraph number 18. And if you have in front of you this corruption version, which I think most of you have, then that would be on page 164. And if I read Hebrew, I will be reading from the Michael Schwartz version, the Hebrew translation. Now, in the last lecture, we were discussing the greatness of the inherent greatness of the land of Israel, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was extolling the virtues of the land of Israel, and he was describing that to the Chazar king, to the Kuzari. Now the Kuzari, and he described to him how whenever the Torah talks about Lifnei Hashem, before God, it's referring to a place, which is the place that we call the land of Israel, and that's the only place where prophecy occurs. And then he dealt with the questions of some potential contradictions to that blanket statement and so on. We dealt with that last time. So now, in 17, the Kuzari told the Chaver, told the rabbi that oh yeah, after your beautiful explanation, right, it makes sense that is where the God's presence should have been experienced by the Jewish people. So it wasn't so much a question, it was a statement, and the Chaver rabbi is about to respond to that statement in 18, and he is going to go on a very interesting discourse, but let's discuss that in a second. So Amar he Chaver, says the Chaver, the rabbi answers as follows: Halo tir'eh ketzad kibla haaretz eshabsoseh. We see what you should see, right? Or we could see that the land of Israel itself was where Shabbat started, was where the idea of Sabbath began, and where Sabbath begins, right? Kakosov, as it says, Shabbos Haaretz, as it's described as the Sabbath of the land. Or V'shav Haaretz Shabbos LaHashem, the land will rest a Sabbath to God. V'aser limchar osa litzmitzos, and we also see that the land of Israel is so precious that one is not allowed to sell a piece of land in Israel as a permanent sale, as a forever sale. Every sale is temporary. As we know, according to the rule of the Yovel, the rule of the Jubilee, if you sell your field, your inheritance in Israel, it automatically goes back to its original owners every 50 years when the Yovel comes around. So the Haaretz lo timocher litzmisus ki li haaretz. Interestingly, I don't know if someone knows more details about this, they can correct me, but I'm pretty sure this even has in its remnant in modern Israeli real estate. When you buy land in Israel, it's purchased for like 50 years, I think, because it's technically owned by the Karen Kayemet, by the Jewish National Fund. I think there's different statuses of different lands within the modern state of Israel, but if it's owned, like large portions of it is, by the Karen Kayemet, which is the Jewish National Fund, which is owned really by the Jewish people over the donations given to that organization over the century. So you're technically buying a lease, like a 49-year lease on the land. Anyway, regardless, whether I'm right or wrong about that, you can look it up. But either way, all of the moadim, all of the holidays and the Sabbaths are all dependent on the land, on the inheritance, which is the land of Israel. So that was a quick statement, but the problem is that how does that work? What do you mean that the Sabbath happens in Israel, right? Obviously, the Sabbath happens everywhere, right? Most of us that don't live in Israel also have a Sabbath. There's certainly a day of the week called Saturday, or the seventh day of the week, or the Sabbath day, or whatever you want to call it, that occurs everywhere. So the Kuzari says Ha'im lo nikba'a hascholas hayomim misin. This is paragraph 19. Doesn't the day start in China? Kihi reishis hamizrach shel olam hamiyushav. That is the beginning, the eastern edge of the settled world. So now in 20, the Chaver is going to go on a very long discourse, which is going to be, to be honest, it's mind bending, and my brain gets twisted in knots thinking this through. But let's just remember a few things, right? And this is this Kuzari, this piece that the Chaver is about to say in 20, has been used in halachic discussions, right, of law as to where the Jewish international dateline should be set. Is there such a thing as a halachic dateline? So just to understand the concept, and forgive me if I'm saying things that are obvious to you, but basically, right, at the sun, and when I say the sun goes, right, I understand that it's really the earth rotating, but to our eyes, and the reason why I'm using this language is because that's the language that the Kuzari would have used. He, of course, living in a world which was geocentric. In his mind, the sun revolved around the earth, and it revolved every 24 hours. It went around. Now, no one in those days thought the world was flat. If anyone taught you that they thought the world was flat before Columbus, they were being silly. And those of you that learned Rambam know that. And Rabbi Yehuda Levi also, everyone knew. For thousands of years, people knew the world was round. And the way they saw it was the sun rotated around the world every 24 hours. So they knew the world was round. And they understood. And the known settled world to them, the easternmost edge was China, right? And the westernmost edge was England, really, or Africa, the western parts of Africa, right? They didn't know about the Western Hemisphere, but it wouldn't have been beyond their imagination that there were lands where there might have been people that they just didn't know about. They didn't really think about it that much, and may have been just sea, who knows? But the globe continued all the way around. So basically, what the Kuzari is, the Chazar king is saying is, as the sun goes around the world, right, we have to designate a starting point that when it pops up and the day starts, right, where do we call the beginning of the day, right? So it has to be somewhere. So it would make sense to assume that it starts in China. And roughly, very roughly, but still true, that when the international dateline was set, whenever it was set, I don't know when, I don't know, maybe one of you can look it up, but it was set by the Europeans, right, who also drew the dateline more or less before the sun hit China, right, or what they viewed, maybe Japan, or what they viewed as the settled, that far end of the world, so that the landmass of Europe, Asia, and Africa, which is really one big mass, right, the day would begin as the sun starts to rise over that landmass. So in other words, if you're in China and you're traveling towards the United States, let's say you travel to Hawaii, right, you're going to cross over the international dateline, right, and when you do that, right, you are going to go back into yesterday, right? So because so just imagine that like this. So now that we get this, before we start letter 20, which we're about to read, remember that the Kuzari is going to land Israel at the center, right? So if the land of Israel is at the center, so then everything is in reference to the center. And he has an appendix C in the Korobkin, which he does a beautiful job explaining all of this. But if you're really into this stuff, then I suggest you read it and concentrate. Personally, I'm not that particularly interested, but mostly because it bends my brain, and I get a headache, and I don't feel that I gained that much from trying to do these mental gymnastics. But I made a promise to everyone that I'm going to learn everything, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to learn everything. The bottom line of it all is, of course, the fact that Israel is the center of the world in the Kuzari. Now, the halachic decisors had to deal with this question practically, most famously, and this is just a historical note, during World War II when Jewish refugees from Europe made their way to China and Japan. And the question became when they're supposed to keep the Shabbos. When do they keep Shabbos there? So anyone that's read the history of the exile of the Yeshiva of Mir, right, which was exiled to Shanghai during the World War II, probably read stories of arguments that took place as to exactly where the date line happens and which day is Shabbos there, right? And there's a ton of different opinions, and famously the Chazon Ish had an opinion. And where did they look for sources? Where do you look for halachic sources for a date line? The Gemara, the Talmud doesn't mention anything about an international date line. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about the international date line. So sure enough, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari gives a whole discourse, which we're about to study, on the international date line, right? Long before Europeans decided where, officially where it is, long before the date line that we're familiar with, they did this, they figured it out. He gave his understanding. Now, whether or not the Kuzari should be used as a halachic source is a question in and of itself. This is a book written as philosophy. It wasn't written as a halachic book of Jewish law. But the fact that we have there are very few other early rabbinic sources, right, makes it a lot reasonable, I guess, that they drew from this source, because it was one of the few early sources that the rabbinic sources that discuss this issue in such detail. So that being said, here we go. Amar HeChaver. You know what? I was debating whether I should say this story, but I'll say it. It's a personal family story that I think you guys might find very interesting. So, my great grandfather was Rabbi Shol Yitzi Elazar Taub. Was his name? He was the Mudgitzer Rebbe, or the Grand Rabbi of Mudgitz. He was a Hasidic Rebbe, and he and my grandfather, whose name was Chaim Yitzchak, he was known as Yitzchak Taub, and his brother and brother-in-law, and so three boys, young men, ran the day the Germans invaded Warsaw. And they ran to Lithuania along with hundreds of thousands of other Jews that ran to Lithuania, which was at the time, for a brief period of time in early World War II, it was neutral territory between Russia and Germany. At this early stage, the Jews didn't know who was worse, Stalin or Hitler, right? But Lithuania was, and most people ran to Lithuania with the idea that hopefully they'll figure out a way to get out of there somehow, or at worst live out the time. As long as Hitler and Stalin kept their peace treaty, they'd be able to, Lithuania was maintained in that peace treaty as a neutral middle ground, so maybe they could survive there the whole war. Anyway, as those of you know the end of the story, unfortunately, Hitler didn't respect the pact that he signed with Stalin. He attacked Stalin, bringing Russia into the war, and of course overran Lithuania, and hundreds of thousands of Jews in Lithuania were killed in the Holocaust. But a few managed to escape during that time period, and they got visas, transit. They had, some of them were forged, some of them were real, but visas to countries. My grandfather got a visa to Curacao, the island, off the coast of South America somewhere. Some people got visas there, to other places that were giving visas, but they needed permission, transit visas, to transit across Russia. So some of you may have heard the story of Sugihara, right? Who was a Japanese consul general in Vilna, who wrote against his explicit instructions from his superiors. He saw that these Jews were going to be dead if they didn't get out. He gave them visas. He gave, I don't know how many, you can look it up, a couple thousand visas. So a few people managed to escape. And among them was the yeshiva, all the students of the yeshiva of Mir, and many great rabbinical figures. And among them, I knew from my family history until about a year and a half ago that my grandfather and great-grandfather escaped across Russia and made it to Japan, which is how my grandfather survived the war. I did not know that he had received his visa from Sugihara until about a year and a half ago, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. Now, my children's mother, her grandfather, right, his name was Shlomo Davis, was a student in the Yeshiva of Tels in Lithuania when the World War II broke out. And he ran to Lithuania as well, right? He happened to be a British citizen, right? Because he grew up in London, but his family sent him to Lithuania to learn in Yeshiva. When the war broke out, the only place for him to go, obviously with the intention of going back to England, was to go to Lithuania and try to get to England from there. I knew this story, and because my wife's family, told the story a lot, that he also got a visa. He got a visa from Sugihara to get to Japan. Eventually, from Japan, before Japan entered World War II against Europe, they were already fighting World War II in the Asian part of World War II against China, but they weren't fighting Europe yet. So Japan gave him, he got permission to go to Australia, which was aligned with Britain, and then that's how he ended up escaping the war. So I knew that he had gotten a visa from Sugihara. But a year and a half ago, I was just cruising the internet for some reason, and I was reading about Sugihara, and I saw there was a website, the Sugihara museum in Japan. There's a museum dedicated to Sugihara in his honor in Japan. So I was on the English version of their website, and sure enough, they had a list, right, of every single visa that Sugihara gave out. You can go to the website, and it says the date that he gave the visa, right, and the name of the person. I think it had the person's birth date. It had the person's nationality, what kind of passport the person held. That and some other little bits of information, but but you can look it up in a list. So I was thinking, I never knew how my grandfather got out, right? So first I looked up the name of my children's great-grandfather on their mother's side, and I found it, Shlomo Davis. It was in there. And he was, I think, one of two out of the 1,000 some odd people on the list that had a British passport. But then, sure enough, like literally 2 days later, that my kid's grandfather from one side walked in to get a thing, my great-grandfather and grandfather and a couple of uncles and a couple of aunts walked into the same office and got visas from Sugihara. So my kids from both sides survived because of Sugihara. Now, interestingly, and got visas. Literally, they're alive today. Totally because of Sugihara, because of that one person gave them those visas. And I called my father and to tell him, did you know that my great grandfather got also got a visa from Sugihara? That was not known. Maybe there are some people in my family that knew, but it certainly wasn't talked about. And I didn't know about it growing up. And I had millions of conversations. I talked to my grandfather, when he was alive. I had a very close relationship with him. He told me tons and tons of stories about his escape and his trips across, Russia and Siberia and Japan and living in Japan and moved tons of stories, but he never told me how he got the visa. He never told me about Sugihara, but I found out from the Sugihara website, right? And literally it was 2 days. He walked into the office, 2 days. There was only a period of a few weeks. It was like a July and an August, literally like from the second week of July till the third week of August, he was frantically writing as many visas as he could. Right. And 2 days apart were those two grandparents of my children. So
there's a great movie. Have you seen the movie about Sugihara?
I have not. Maybe I should see it.
It's about 10 years old. I'll try to find it online. I saw it in Washington. It tells the whole story of Sugihara.
Well, but what's relevant to tonight is my grandfather went to Japan. He was one of the first people to go, and he got a training. He went to Kobe, Japan, and that's where he lived out the beginning of the war, was in Japan. And he would laughed about this whole what day is Shabbos thing. He said, he heard that the yeshiva guys in Shanghai were going crazy about some of them fasted 2 days in a row on Yom Kippur, all kinds of crazy stuff. And I couldn't call it crazy. I mean, they were doing what they trying to live the best. But to him, I'm saying it crazy. He thought they were nuts. He said, we kept Shabbos when it was Shabbos. When they said it was Saturday, that was Shabbos. He didn't have this problem. But of course, you imagine a bunch of yeshiva guys, they're going to sit and argue about it in the base medrash, and then they're going to have a thing. Anyway, So one of the main sources that they used was what we're about to read, and I really want to try to get through this tonight. And the main point, and I'm going to be a spoiler alert, the main point of this all is that Israel is the center of the world. That's the bottom line of it all. Okay, so Amar Chaver, I may flip to the English part because, to be honest, I get so confused that, but I'm going to try my best. So v'chi ein haskolas hashabas davka misinai ulefanav me'alush, right? It's not true, right? Right? Isn't it true that Shabbos? When did it start? It started when it was given at Sinai, or actually before that, when at Mara or in Alush, where it was given, where Shabbos was given before Sinai, the mitzvah to keep Shabbos. But it happened Makom Shesham Yard Aman Rishona, the same place and time where the man first fell. Sharein HaShabbos Nechneses El Lemisha Shakalo HaShemesh Acharei Sinai Bihadroga Ad Ketzei Amarav. So the first Shabbos began, right? And it began when the sun went down at that place, which was where the sun set somewhere slightly west of the Sinai, right? After that, El Masha Mitachas La'aretz, Achrechen El Sin, and then the sun continues to go around underneath the earth until it gets to China again, going its next time around, which is on the eastern edge of civilization. So therefore, right, Hashabbos Nikres Besin Shmona Esrei Shos Lacher Eretz Yisrael. So Shabbos really starts, right, 18 hours after it starts in Israel. Now, how does that work? How's 18 hours? So you have to imagine the world as follows. I got this from Korobkin's appendix. But the bottom line is, if you're standing in Israel and it's noon, right, and you go 6 hours to the west, because the sun is going towards the west, right? Remember, we're pretending that the sun is going around the earth because that's what it looks like. So the sun is going to the west. So when it hits somewhere around what we would call Brazil today, somewhere around there, right? So it's setting 6 hours there, right? So now Shabbos is starting in Brazil. And then the sun continues to go to the west, 6 more hours, and it hits somewhere around what we would call Hawaii today, right? And then it goes another 6 hours, and it hits China. These are very rough numbers, right? But so you have 3 times 6, so that's in 18 hours after the sun sets in Israel, the sun is setting in China. Make sense? So that's what he means, right? Ki Eretz Yisrael kumoa ke'emtza ha'olam ha'mushav, because Eretz Yisrael, when compared to China, is the middle, right? So Shkias Achama Be'Eretz Yisrael lichatzi alayla b'sin, because so therefore, when the sun is setting in Israel, it is now midnight in China, right? Right? Because the emtza, because it's 6 hours back, right? So does that make sense? I don't know. Whatever. The emtza yom be'eretz Yisrael shkias achama b'sin, and the middle of the day in Israel is sunset in China. Zehu sod hakvios habunui al shmona esrei shos. This is the secret of how you set the dates, which based on this 18-hour difference. So Kamosha Amru Nolad Kodem Chatzos Shenir Samach Shkias Lachama. When you see the moon, if it comes out before Chatzos, then you know that it's gonna appear sometime before the setting of the sun. Zemes Yachas L'Eretz Yisrael, which is basically using Israel as a reference point. Makom Torah, which is the place where the Torah is given. V'hu hamakom shebo hurad adam migan eden b'al Shabbos. It is the place where a person, where the human beings, where Adam Arishon, the first human being, came, was brought into Gan Eden on. When he came down from Gan Eden, he immediately entered Israel on the night of Shabbos, right? So and that's why we start counting the years after the days of creation, and we start counting them based on when it started in Israel. V'sham heichel Adam nosein shemos layamim, and that's where Adam started naming the dates. V'chol emas sheyushva haaretz v'hiskashru b'nei Adam, and as the lands. So the settlement of the world started from Israel. So the counting of the days. So there's really several reasons he's given. There's two so far that he's given as to why Israel is the beginning and the center of the world. Number one, because when Shabbos first started, that's when human beings were first there. And the first Shabbos started by Adam Rishon, right? It happened in Israel. So that's why Shabbos always is reference point starting there. And as settlement continued to spread outside from there, and Adam had kids who had kids who had kids who had kids, and the world starts getting settled, everyone counted the days as per when it starts in Israel. That's why you don't have arguments as to, if you go to Pakistan, they'll agree whether today is Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, because the whole world, and we went through this before, right? That in the settled known world that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi knew about, everyone did agree that today was Sunday or Monday. I already told you though that in indigenous societies in Indonesia or wherever, or Australia, they didn't have the 7-day week. But in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's known world, everyone had the same 7-day week, right? V'altavi li raya negdi. Right? Don't argue with me about people. Some people decide to start the day, right, at noon, right? Nowadays, we're used to starting the day, the secular day starts at midnight. It's an arbitrary decision that most of the world today, at least, in 2026, agrees that the new day starts at midnight. But then there were people that started the day in the middle of the day, which is around the time when the westernmost part of the known world, the sun is setting, right? So for them, that's the beginning. But nivra ha'or harishon achar kein hashemesh, right? Because the light that was created on day one was the light that immediately after it came, it went away. Remember, there was light, there was dark. So v'nasa laila li'olam yushav, so it became nighttime for the settled world. V'sava seidratzav shebo alayla kodem li'om v'kasav ha'yerev ha'boker v'chenemer setor me'erev ha'boker tishbzu shabbatchem. So the bottom line that he's saying is that in Israel, when Adam Rishon came and the sun set, that's when Shabbos started. So that's when the day starts. That's when everyone agrees the day starts, right? So now I'll be honest. There's a lot of different ways to understand what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying here. So some say, like the Chazon Ish, understand this to mean that he's just explaining how the first Shabbos started, right? Others say that he means that when the day starts in Israel, then it's also starting in China, right? Even though it's a different time of day. But for them, that's the beginning of the day. So like if the day starts when the sun goes down, so even though in China it's the middle of the night, right? That's also considered the new day there. Because the whole world is starting their day based on when the day starts in Israel. And there's a million other explanations, which I'm not going to go into. And I said, you can read Appendix C. Krobkin does a great job describing this whole thing, and I had my brain was twisted in knots. So al titan negdi melech hadoshim atzofim vakochavim gon ve'achachma, right? Don't argue with me about the people who the astronomers, right? Who when they look in the stars and they try to extrapolate that the sun first started over China, not over Israel, because they're stealing the wisdom from us, right? As prophecy started to wane, they found other astronomical sciences that they devised, right? And they went and they gained some knowledge, and they decided to switch around what was already known. So they decided to come up with a new beginning of the day. And based on their knowledge, they figured out a new time, a new place to start the new day. Mitoch zekavu et sin b'torat chol yamamos. So they decided that China is the beginning. Benigud la Torah, which is against the Torah, which says that Israel is the beginning. Remember, I'm just going to say that the Rabbi Yehuda Levi is making an assertion here that the Torah says that the day starts in Israel, but that's his understanding of the Torah. It's not everyone's, but that's his understanding, right? Hamachlokas beinenu leveinam hirak b'akdamas halayla layom. The argument between us and them is we start the day at the beginning. We agree on the general astronomical times and when the sun rises and sets here and there and the other place, but we start the day when the night falls, right? And they start the day when the sun comes up. Lachain. Therefore, therefore, this 18-hour difference between Israel and China, right, is the main idea that you need to know when you're starting to name the days of the week. Right, between Eretz Yisrael, which is the place where we start naming the day, right? So as soon as the sun goes down in Israel on Friday night, we name that Shabbos, right? And at that time, right, it's 18 hours later. Is it later or earlier? I'm so confused. At that time, when the sun goes down in Israel, right, in China now, right, it's the middle of the night, right? Right, it's 18 hours later, right? So the sun goes down. Let's assume, just for argument's sake, let's make a 6 a.m. sunrise, 6 p.m. sunset, right? So sun goes down at 6 p.m. In China, it's 18 hours later. So that's 12 midnight, 6 a.m. It's like 12 noon, really, over there, right? So it's 18 hours later. It's the middle of the day there now, right? Because does that make sense? The sun sets in the west, right? So it's in China the sun already set. No, it can't be 12 midnight. It's 12 midnight there, right?
Right.
It's 12 midnight there. Okay,
later.
That's why I said I'm going to get so freaking confused, and please forgive me. This is just really not my area of expertise. So it's midnight there, but what night day is it? Right? It's midnight there, but is it Shabbos? Right? Or is it Saturday at that midnight, or is it Sunday, or is it Friday? I don't know. Like, what day is it, right? So he's saying that because in Israel, when the sun goes down, right, so that for those at the other side of the world where it's midnight, right, it's Shabbos there, right, and that's how you figure out Shabbos based on what day it is in Israel when the sun goes down. Okay. Shem HaShabbos l'mashal mamshich li'ikari al hayamama harishona sheba echil Hashemesh esibuva mitzei marav. Right. The name of Shabbos it's continued to be called that, right, on the first day that the sun started to go on its track, on its westerly track. So it started in China, moving along on its westerly track, right? And it hit Israel, and it became Shabbos. So since it's on that path from the beginning of civilization till the end of the civilization, and during that track, it crossed over Israel and it hit Shabbos. So that entire round is Shabbos. So the date line is somewhere before China, right? So Adam Ra Osa Shokas Biosa Beretz Yisrael. Right, because Adam was sitting while the sun was traveling. The sun was moseying along the sky from China to Pakistan to Iran to hovering over Syria. Now, boom! Now it's in Israel, right? So, and Adam looks up and says, "Oh, the sun's going down now. Shabbos." All right. So that whole track of the sun was Shabbos, right? As those 18 hours passed, that's when the sun was going down. And at first, it set in on the day that it first set on Shabbos. It started off in China. That's when Shabbos started. All right. So that is now the international date line. That's when we call the name of Shabbos, right, or of the day. Mashame Everlo, but that which is past it, Nikra Mizrach L'Makomas Chosmos. So if you go east of China and you land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or you land in Hawaii, right? Well, that's before Shabbos, so that's yesterday, right? And that'll still be that'll be Friday until the sun comes all the way around again, and then it becomes Shabbos. So it's interesting that it does fall out in a similar place to where the international date line that we recognize today comes out. The only thing is that he obviously doesn't know anything about the world. He's familiar with China, right? But he doesn't know anything about the world between Spain and China. That whole vast swath of planet. He knew it was there, but he had no idea what was there. So he's not going to tell you about the Americas or Hawaii, right? And exactly where in that vast expanse of unknown planet, right, you could draw the line. To him, it would have been like Mamish, right, just off the coast of China, right? So there must be some place on this ball of planet, which is the end of the west and the beginning of the east. And the reason why there's such a place is because of Israel, right? So the international date line is based on Israel. Right? And that happens to be because Israel was the beginning of the settlement of the world. That's where humans started settling the world. So when Adam called it a day, where did he call it? He called it from where he was. Where was he? There. So that's why the whole world agreed. And that's where we calculate the day. And this isn't just a Torah rule. This is a natural phenomenon. It doesn't make sense that every single person in the world agrees on Sunday that it's Sunday and on Monday that it's Monday. So he's making the assumption that if you were to travel to China with a calendar and every day as the sun goes down, he would mark off a new day, and he gets to China and he thinks it's Tuesday, he imagines that if he would meet Emperor or whatever of China and ask him what day is it, he would say in Chinese, Tuesday, right? So if that's the case, so it must be, right, that there has to be a natural starting point. There must have been a place where everybody first started calling it Tuesday, so that when everyone went to the east and to the west and reached the ends of the universe where we could live, which in his mind was China, right? They must have agreed that it must have started somewhere. So right? It can't be that one of them is for east for me and it's west for you. It would be very confusing. The historical fact that he's asserting that everyone in the world agrees that it's Sunday, right, must mean that there was a starting point where everyone once upon a time lived in this starting point. And then as they moved to other places, they all continued using those days, right? Shekain Oz because otherwise every place would have been the middle. And then one guy would have said, well, that's the east and that's the west. And you would have said, no, that's the west, so that's the east. Right? So Sin China, well, it's east when you're in Israel. China is to the east. But when you're on the bottom of the earth, which in his mind is the middle of no man's land, our mind would be somewhere in Brazil, I guess, right? Or wherever, someplace in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right? They would look to the west to find China, right? So, but if you're going to have an international date line, like he's asserting you have to have, then even if you're all the way in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the expansive unknown planet, to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, you still would have called China to the west. It's just a much longer trip to the west. I'm sorry, to the east. It's just a much, much longer trip to the east, but it's still to the east because if you all agree on that the day starts at a certain point. So, so on. There wouldn't be any east or west. It would be all one big confusion. So there has to be a place, right? So this is very logical. It makes a lot of sense, and it's exactly why. And I have no idea what year, but I'm sure somebody can Google that for me. It's probably, I'm guessing, sometime in the 1600s or something. I don't know. Whenever they decided where the international date line is, right? So that this is Rabbi Yehuda Levi is describing to us exactly why the international dateline people sat down and decided to make a dateline. Now I know that they did it based on Greenwich, England, right? Which they made, and they did it. They tried to do it exactly opposite Greenwich, England, right? Because mostly because they had a very Eurocentric view of the world, which Rabbi Yehuda Levi also has a Eurocentric view of the world, but he has a more Israelocentric view of the world, right? And they needed to plunk the date line on the opposite so that it doesn't confuse the most of the what they knew as the known civilized world. If they made the date line in the middle of Russia or the middle of Germany, it would have really knocked people off. If they would have, if you're traveling down the street and all of a sudden it's Tuesday and it was Wednesday 2 minutes ago, you can get a little confused. So they needed to make it somewhere out there. So they did it there. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi is really making the same argument for a date line. About 600 years, and honestly, please, if someone could tell me, please do so. But probably about 600 years before the Europeans actually settled on a date line. So therefore, it must be that it started from Israel. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Levi really doesn't make a good case. He makes a good case for why there has to be one, but why it has to be Israel has to be the center, he didn't really make such a great case for, but he's asserting that. But it makes sense to Rabbi Yehuda Levi historically because that's where humanity started. So that's where it started. So ulam yeshal kolpanim mirvach l'kriyas hashemos, right? Ki lo yitachan l'kvar b'chol nekuda shel aretz etz afakim, right? So there is space here. I'm going to find this here because
this says 1884.
18. Oh, so it's a lot later than I thought.
18 was established.
All right. Well, if it's still done for the same reasons I described, but later than I thought. But regardless, they did choose Greenwich, England, right? And they did opposite Greenwich, England, right?
Yeah, so, I know at Greenwich. Well, it says I'm not so sure how that's where the people were located, but
I think they tried to do
the 0 degree longitude is in Greenwich, England.
So then, so 180 is the opposite side, and that's roughly where the date line is. Although it's only rough because I'm pretty sure that wherever it hit like a archipelago of islands, right, that are grouped together, rather than go slam right through that group of islands, which would really confuse the hell out of the people that lived there. They hooked it around, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So that if you live in those islands, at least when you talk to your neighbor, it's the same day.
Same day.
Right. So
it says it says it's zigzagging around political borders such as Eastern Russia and Alaska's Aleutian Islands. So everybody's in the same
in the same
24 time zones. So they got to work on that.
So now he's going to talk a little bit about time zones, and I'm gonna break my way through this. Forgive me if I don't do the best job, but I'm keeping my promise. So I'll stick with it. So ulam yeshal kapana mirvach l'kriyas shemos. There is still a like divisions to how we call the names of the different regions or zones. Right? It wouldn't be possible to have a separate time for every spot. Like,
can you see that? This is the zigzag that's through the Pacific.
I can see a little bit. Yeah.
That's see that zigzags. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, Rabbi Yehuda Levi wasn't thinking about zigzags because all he knew is that the end was China. For ours, he knew there was nothing else after that. Right. So if you block a line in the middle of the sea, he doesn't really care if the dolphins get confused what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, it's not anywhere near China, by the way, as you know. It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. China is way far away.
All right. Well,
so midway between the United States and China.
Okay. Well, it's still in Rabbi Levi's mind, east of China, right?
Yes,
Because
it's
that's the
east of China.
beginning of civilization, right? So so now he's saying that, so like wherever you stand, if you're in Jerusalem, you have lots of easts and lots of wests, right? You look to the east, you go east, and then you can go further east, and then you can go further east, and then go further east, and so on and so forth. So if you're going to change the time of the day every east, then again, you and I, if we try to call a lecture for 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, we'd be very confused, because if you're 2 miles east of me, then it's 11:02, and for me it's 11:01, and it'd be very confusing, right? So hamizrach shel Tzion l'mashal shona min hamizrach shel Beis Hamikdash. The east of Zion is different than the east from the temple itself, right? If anyone was at Mount Zion, right, which is now, there's a big church there, the something or other, something happened there. And there's also the Har Zion, is where the grave of King David is. It's not real, but it's what people venerate as the grave of King David. So there's things on Har Zion, but that's a little bit farther. I think it's a little southwest of the Temple Mount, right? So if you're going to the east of this, is not the same as the east of that. So umagaleho afakim shalem shonim be'emes, right? So so you don't so the actual times of sunrise and sunset are different, even though we don't necessarily see it, right? Like you and I, if we're in one town, we more or less assume that there's a time. Like you look up candle lighting time for Birmingham, Alabama, or Washington, D.C., you'll find a time for the city that's not going to tell you at each block it's a different time, even though technically it really is. But but because you don't perceive a difference when when you're in a place that's close by. And Kol Shekain, Damascus l'gabe Yerushalayim. Certainly, if you're looking at Damascus versus Jerusalem, which is even farther east, Mechrachim Eifo Lomar Shabbos Shel Damascus He Lifnei Shabbos Shel Yerushalayim. So it forces you to say that Sabbath starts in Damascus before it starts in Jerusalem, right? Shabbos Shel Yerushalayim Lifnei Shabbos Shel Mitzrayim, and the Jerusalem Sabbath starts before the Egyptian Sabbath, right? So there must be some divider line that divides things into segments, right? So therefore, we divide it by hours, right? And we add it up to 18 hours, right? We could have arbitrarily decided that it's not 18, but we could have made each hour 30 minutes long and decided to make it 36 hours, right? But we made it 18, no more or less. So in this time zone, they call it Shabbos after that time zone, and so on and so forth through the time zones. Ad asher tishlamna shmon esrei shos me'ezman shabo hischila kriyas shem Shabbos v'shasha b'sanet shel Yisrael, until you pass that 18-hour mark, which is the amount of time until we get to China. So us posekes, now no longer do we call it Shabbos anymore. Now it's a new day once the sun crosses that mark. And there's no one in the world that's going to call it Shabbos anymore once it passes the 18 hours. Now we're starting to call it Sunday. And therefore we said, I'm sorry, I know I said this a few times already, but this is painful. It's not the most fun, but I promised I will not learn a book and skip things. I'm just not doing it. So we're going to make our way through this chapter, and we'll do it and finish. And if anyone finds a lecture somewhere, there's probably guys that are experts in this stuff that have lectured on time zones and date lines and halachic date lines. But you can imagine, though, that this is a gold mine for those people who are trying to figure out when Shabbos starts in China, right? Because I'm not aware of any other Jewish source that of this early in halachic literature. Of course, in the 20th century, there's plenty, but in this, that from an early Rishon of Rabbi Yehuda Levi's time, that goes into this whole concept in such detail and try to mine this for how to start Shabbos. Nowadays we're arguing about when you do Shabbos if you're an astronaut flying in the space station. That's already a whole new can of worms that I'm not going to open tonight. But again, that has to do with the new moon. It means to say that Nolad Hayareach Kodem Chatzos Yom Shabbos B'Yerushalayim. If the new moon shows up before midday on Shabbos in Jerusalem, it must have been seen on Shabbos before the sun went down. What does that mean? Perashadavar Shmo Shel Yom HaShabbos, that the name called Shabbos, right? That seventh day of the week that we call Shabbos, or some people call it Saturday, or whatever language you speak. Himshich b'meshech shmona esrei hashos achrei shekorim l'Shabbos b'makom ha'aschola. That day continued for those 18 hours after they started calling it Shabbos when it started, right? Until the sun comes back around to the zenith, to the high point of Eretz Yisrael, right? Which after a day and a night passed. So if someone happens to be hanging out in China looking for the new moon, he'll see it before the day of Shabbos starts. To be honest, I don't understand really how this works with the Molad, but I'm just telling you that that's what he's stating. And now it started Sunday. Okay. All right, we're almost at the end of 20. I really want to finish this tonight, even though I might go a little over time. But let's just finish this up because yeah. Okay, so hakavana bekach sheyesh shemos lemiyashvon votzim b'cholam yushav hi sheyamar lemishnimtza b'tzin lemishnimtza b'magreb. No matter where you are, there are names to the day. Be'ezeh yom chagosim es Rosh Hashanah. Right? What day? When did you celebrate Rosh Hashanah, for example? And people will say on Shabbos. That's when we celebrate it. And the guy in China will tell you he celebrated it on Shabbos, and the guy in the Maghreb, I guess that refers to, I don't know, some part of Arabia, whatever they call the Maghreb, right? But we know that one guy was still celebrating Rosh Hashanah when the other guy was already over, right? Because but why are they both calling it Shabbos? Because that's what it was called in Israel, because Israel set the day. So they both celebrated it on the same day, even though when one guy was finished with the holiday and the other guy was still celebrating it. So, and why is it this way? Because the Shabbatot, the Sabbaths, and the holidays are dependent upon the land of Israel, which is the inheritance of God. And added to this, right, we refer to it as God, the place where God's feet rest, God's holy mountain, Shar Shemayim, the gates to heaven, right? And we say, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, from Zion, the Torah emanates. Hosef al hishtokakusam shel avos lishkon ba'oda b'dei avodah zara. Added to that, the desire of the patriarchs to reside there in Israel, even though Israel at the time was controlled and inhabited mostly by idol worshippers. And how much they desperately wanted to go there, and how much they missed and desired it. And how they traveled there to Israel. Everything they did was to go there. Kagon Yaakov Yosef, as we see with Yaakov and Yosef. And the tremendous desire that Moses had to go to the land. And it was such a terrible thing for Moses that he was held back from going. So they showed him, God showed him from a mountaintop the land, but that was the best he can see. And how much of a kindness it was even just to see the land. Hosef, and add to that, the desire of all the nations. And this is an interesting historical point. Everybody always wanted to come to Israel. Every nation wanted to conquer Israel. Even though it was this tiny little strip of land, everybody's always talking about it. To this day, you open the news, it's always everyone, Israel this, Israel that, Israel the other thing. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants to go there. Everyone wants to be the boss there. That's just the way it's always been. Paras, Persia, Hodu, India, Yavan, Greece, and all of them. Sheyukru b'shmon karbanos. They wanted to bring sacrifices there. Be espalo l'manon b'osabais merom. They wanted us to pray for them there. They all spent their money there, and even though they had other religions, they still looked up to our temple. Right? Because they didn't accept upon themselves the true religion, of course, which is Judaism. Add to that the value that we see today that everyone has. So here he's referring to the Crusades and the fighting over the land of Israel. The whole world at his time was turned upside down, fighting over the land of Israel. Even though now there's no divine presence that's visible that you can see, but they're still fighting over it. Everybody, the pilgrims are all going there from the whole world, and everyone desires it. Except for the Jews, right? We're the only ones that can't go there because we're suffering so much, and we can't. We're not unable to, but all the other nations are going. And add to that all of the great qualities of Israel that our rabbis, that the wise sages of the ages gave to the land of Israel. It's a long story. And let me just end by doing 21. Amar Kuzari, says the Khazar king, tell me a little bit that you remember about what the sages say about the greatness of Israel. So we're going to do that. In 22, we're going to go through those things. But we only have a little bit left of his discussion of the greatness of the land of Israel. But what we learned today was a little bit about the international date line and how Israel is where all the names of the week came from. Now, there will be there's a lot of important points that come out of this. But I'm going to say one of the main things that come out of all of this discussion, which is very important theologically, historically, culturally, nationally, on almost every level, is the assertion, and again, another spoiler, I'm going to give spoiler alert, and that is that the Khazar king, and we're going to study this in Mirz Hashem, God willing, next week, the Khazar king says, well, if it's so great, then why aren't you there? Right? And Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to put in the mouth of the rabbi, you're right, I should be there. Which is fundamentally an incredibly powerful statement, because what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is basically saying to the people of his generation for whom he's writing this book for the general public, right? And after extolling the virtues and greatness of the land of Israel, he's then going to say, we should all be going there, right? So that's why I'm telling you that the birth of modern religious Zionism is this book. And there's no question about it. The idea that in the diaspora, we should not be sitting around and waiting for some guy on a white horse to come and lead us there, but we should pack our bags and get on an airplane or a boat or a donkey and go, right? It really comes from Rabbi Yehuda Levi. I say donkey because my great-grandfather, may his memory be blessed, another one of my great-grandfathers, when he was 12 years old, he wasn't even bar mitzvah yet, lived in Volin, Russia in the early 20th century. And he was inspired by a group of Zionists in his town. And he was a kid. And he took the family's donkey and got on it in Russia and went to Israel. He got all the way to Turkey somewhere and sold his donkey, got a boat ticket, and took the boat the rest of the way. So he went by donkey. But anyway, that concept, we're going to get to the Kuzari is going to lay that down, and he's one of the first, earliest, and most important sources for in the medieval times for somebody to get up and say we should, even though it's hard and it's tough, and we should go. And he himself, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, did that at the end of his life. If you remember from our introduction, we talked about that. Anyway, I went a little bit over the hour, but if there's any questions, comments, observations, I'm open. Fire away.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm still dizzying trying to figure out these time zones. Because I remember
Yeah.
crossing the international date line once,
Uh-huh.
and you gain a day or you
Uh-huh.
lose a day. If you're going from Japan without to California and you cross over, do you, what do you do? You gain a day, right?
I think so. Yeah. If you
Because you're
go
going.
backward, you gain a day. If you go from the Japan to California, you gain a day. If you go from California to Japan, you lose a day.
Okay.
So
Okay.
as you're flying from California to to to
You lose
whatever
a day.
Japan, it's Sunday, 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 and all of a sudden it's Monday,
Monday, yeah.
right? And if you go back, it's the other way around.
Right.
No matter how many times I've studied and understood it,
Right.
5 seconds later it confused me, because it's
Yeah.
so hard to, we're so fixed in how we understand
Well,
time.
I know you gain a day because I had a lawyer friend who was working in Japan. I worked for
Hmm.
him all day long. Then he got on a plane, came back to Washington, and he computed that he had worked 25 hours that day,
Right.
and the computer wouldn't accept it. So that it's impossible to work 25 hours in a day. And he had a long time trying to convince the computer people that he was entitled to compensation for 25 hours of work.
So
And
they, what, they would have to probably plug
they,
it
they,
into
they
a
they just
different
couldn't have the billing system couldn't handle charging, even though it was legitimate 20. So you had to gain a date in order to do that. Okay.
Yeah, they have to figure out a workaround. It
Okay.
reminds me of the Y2K scare. Remember when we all thought the computers were going to go haywire?
Yeah,
But
no.
anyway, yeah.
Okay.
So that's yeah. Today was International Dateline. It is as hard and as tough and as maybe not so philosophically exciting as some of the other things we've studied together, but it is really interesting to see somebody in his day and age with such a good comprehension of obviously his geography was not our geography, obviously, right? But he still had a really good comprehension of the need for an international date line, the need for time zones, and this is, he really had to have thought all this stuff out,
Mhm.
and that's pretty cool, you know and yeah, so there we are, the Jewish version of the international date line. We just studied
Yeah.
it.
But by the way, Nachmanides, he left he left Spain to go to Israel. So the idea
Mhm.
of going to Israel wasn't
Well,
during this
first of all,
time.
Nachmanides was 150, 200 years after Abu Levi.
Oh, I see. Okay. And the dates we're saying here were the 1100s.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember exactly, but
Okay,
yeah.
I'll check. Okay.
So, but the Nachmanides maybe not 100, maybe about 100, 150 years
Okay.
after.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but either way, you're right though. Yes, and there were others that traveled to Israel. I'm not saying Abu Levi wasn't the first. There was plenty, but Rabbi Levi gives voice to that whole idea, and really, and encourages it, and basically says that we have to, and we all should be doing it, in a world where, so he kind of established that in the modern sense. Until his time, it was more trying to figure out how to survive the exile, and from his time, it was still trying to figure out how to survive the exile, but we should all be going, you know. So it preceded Theodore Herzl by quite a long shot. um, so yeah, and that's important. We're going to study that in more depth. We'll have more of a deeper discussion about that next week. But he had a very strong influence on modern religious Zionism. I mean, that's why you'll find this book. You go to your average religious Zionist institution in Israel, you'll see Kuzari all over the place, and it's not a coincidental. All right. Anyway, have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining, and Mitch, we'll see you next week.
Yes, God willing.
Yes. All right.